Hello friends, welcome to this second session on ggplot2. If you haven't watched our first session that we had last week, then first go ahead and watch that and then come back to this one. In that session, we talked about the definition of ggplot2, what are the different components and how does it create graphs layer by layer. So today we will continue from where we had left off, and we will look at some bar graphs and how we can create each of them. And bar graphs are going to be very frequently used in your data visualization, so you should know a few different types of bar graphs and how to create them. But before we go and look at the bar graphs, let's look at our data for today. So today we are going to use this diamonds data set, which is inbuilt using R in R. So what that has is some 53,940 records, and it contains the data about diamonds like the carat, the cut, the color, the clarity, depth, table, x, y, z are also different variables, and then finally the price of the diamond. So that's what it contains, and you can see that most of them are numeric data. And let's look at the structure actually. So you can see that most of the data is numeric or integer, other than the cut here, which is a ordinal factor variable. Color is also ordinal factor variable, and then clarity is also a ordinal factor variable. And here you can see that how many levels these particular factor variables have, and then all the rest of them are numeric data. So that's our data set for today. So let's now go back and see what are the graphs that we will create today. So the first one is a stacked bar graph, and this is so frequently used because it can help you to represent not only uh, one category in x-axis but a separate subcategory also with the help of colors, which are actually stacked on top of each other. So that's why it's called a stacked bar graph. For example, here in the diamond data set, like we saw, we have different cuts like fair, good, very good, premium, and ideal, right? So these are the different cuts, and each bar graph is representing one particular cut. But again, within each cut, we are able to represent the clarity with the help of all these colors, and these colors are also, the legend for each color is also explained over here, so that we know what clarity does each color represent. And then on y-axis we have the counts of each particular category. So we are able to know with the help of this graph that there are 5 categories, and then within them there are number of different subcategories, and we are also able to know what is the count of each category and approximately what is the sub count of each subcategory also. So it's a very useful graph, and let's see how we can do it with the help of ggplot2. So the way we discussed last time, the very first piece of argument that you will pass to your ggplot function is the data set, which is diamonds in this case, and the next one is aesthetic. So here on x-axis we are giving cut, like we saw, and our fill is clarity. So that will tell ggplot2 that fill in the bars with the clarity variable, and then automatically it is assigning colors to each type of clarity, and then we are telling it to use the bar graph when it is representing or rendering this graph visually. So let's see how it comes. So that's how it comes out. That's the picture that I have on the slide also, right? So here I have it a bit more magnified, so maybe you can see it here better. So we have all these different cuts and all of these different clarities, and then the count, right? Very intuitive and easy to understand. Okay, So let's close this one and go to the next one. Okay, this is a gradient bar graph, exactly the same as before, just that in the previous one, the fill was a discrete variable. The fill clarity was a discrete variable, whereas here the fill is price and it is a continuous variable. So if we go back to our data set, we can see that clarity is a factor variable, isn't it? We saw it here. It's a factor variable, ordinal factor variable. So it's a discrete variable, whereas price here is actually a numeric variable, isn't it? It has numeric data in it. So if I want to, instead of a discrete variable, I use a numeric variable, then my colors will be distributed continuously instead of in a discrete manner. So this particular gradient of scale is then created and which is then assigned to each of my bars. So here the lighter color is representing a a higher price, and a darker color is representing a lower price. So that's how the scale is working here. And how do we create this kind of a graph? So very simple, again same as before. The only change here that along with fill equals to price, we also have to give group equals to price. Otherwise it won't be able to identify that it needs to create a gradient with price. So we have to give both of these values together for the graph to be rendered. So it'll take a little bit of time because it's doing two activities. It is grouping it also. So it'll take a lot of time, and then we have like some 53,000, almost 54,000 rows of data. So it takes a little bit of time. So let's give it some more seconds till it creates the graph. Okay, so here it is. You can see it better now. So you can see the lighter colors are here, and then it is continuously scaled from light to dark color, right? So that's another type of graph that you might be able to use to show different relationships um, to your stakeholders and other team members. And the next one is histogram. So we are very familiar with what is histogram. We use it to show continuous variable on x-axis. So here I have just used the depth variable in the x-axis. So if you see here, we have a depth variable. It's a continuous variable. So that's what is used here on the x-axis, and the frequency of each kind of depth is on the y-axis. And the way we create it is we again give the diamonds as input, and then we have actually a function called geom.histogram, which is specifically to create histograms. And then we can give the width of the bin, because when we are creating histograms, sometimes we create bins, and in this case also, if you had created it in Excel or something, you first would have to create the bins and then create the histogram. So we need to give a bin width here, appropriate bin width. And then we have another function called x limit, basically telling you the limit of the x-axis. And then you can give some colors if you want to make it look nicer. So let's run this one and see what happens. Okay, so this is how the histogram gets created, right? So you can see that the limit here is from 55 to 70, and then our continuous variable has been now represented with the help of a histogram, and each bin is zero point 0.1, and on the y-axis is the count or the frequency. Okay, so that brings us to the last one, which is a side-by-side graph. This is probably the graph that I use the most, along with the first stacked bar graph that we saw. And because once again we are always trying to represent number of different categories, and this helps to do it very easily. But before we look at this graph, let's look at the data. Because whenever you're creating this kind of a side by side graph, the way you give the input data to it is very important. So whatever way your data is, you first have to convert it to this format, right? So you have gender, and you are repeating male 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 and female female, and then routine and count, and then you are breaking down male into different routine and count. You cannot do it if you have here male female routine count. If you had another two columns called male and female, uh, then and if you give that kind of a data as input, it won't work. So this is basically called like the long form. So you have to give your data in that long form. Then only side by side graph you can create the way that I was showing you guys. So here we have gender, routine and count. So gender is male and female, and routine, so male has daily, weekly, monthly, annually, and then female also has daily, weekly, monthly, annually, and then we have count for each of these, right? So we may be able to represent it in another way where the number of rows is less and it still represents the same data, but if we give that as input to ggplot2, it won't be able to understand it or create the graph properly. So you have to convert it into this form and only then give it as input. So if you do that, if you get your data cleaned and ready, then this graph would be created very easily. So I have given the data set name. It's actually sample data, just some data that I created. So sample data. Then in x-axis, I'm saying that take gender. So I have this one set of side by side graph, and then I have this second set of side by side graph. So this first set is representing female, the second set is representing male, right? So this x-axis is gender, and then y is count as usual. I have kept the count variable, and then fill is routine. Okay, so routine is annually, daily, monthly and weekly. If I had left it just here, it would have been like a stacked bar graph like we saw before, but I want it to be individual graphs for individual bar graphs for each routine instead of being stacked on top of each other. So to do that, we have to give two new arguments inside our geom bar function. One is stat equals to identity, and position equals to position dodge. So we have to include these two to be able to unstack and show them as individual bar graphs, individual bars. Let's see how that works. So if I am just going to first do this very first part, and then okay, oh sorry, I wanted to show you guys how to do that. Geom bar. So if I just do this much, let's see what happens. Right, so this is what I was saying, that it will just do a stacking of the different colors if I don't give all these position equals stat equals to identity and position equals to position dodge. But if I do that, let's go back to how it was before, and if I now give this entire thing, then it will break it down, right? So that's how you can create this kind of a graph. There are a lot of other arguments that can be used to make these graphs look so much more better, but we'll look at it in the next session. So guys, that was today's session. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and if you did, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also follow us on Facebook and share it with your friends. So thank you so much and talk to you again on Thursday.